So I'm Chris. I'm the ecosystem manager for Barclays Eagle Labs. So we basically support early stage startup and scale up companies here in the city partnered with the University of York. So we're here to kind of help those innovative businesses that are looking to grow quickly, solve a problem, and hopefully lead to some positive change in the world as well. So the AI is a massive industry for us at the moment to see how we can support those businesses to grow. We do that through a range of different programs and things like that. If that sounds of any interest at all, come and have a chat with me. We have got a website with loads of information on there as well. I do want to say thank you to Nadine for setting all this up, and it's been a long six different sessions, so I think congratulations to Nadine for getting this far. And it's great to see so many faces in the room, and hello to the people online as well. So all the fun stuff out the way. I'll give you some housekeeping bits and pieces. So toilets through on your right. There is no fire alarms planned, I don't think. Nope, but I've got a shake of the head, which is good. Come and see us if you've got any questions. Again, with the photography, let us know, and we can make sure that we do that for you. Online, there's some information there as well, so you should be able to just kind of rejoin through the same link if you have any issues there as well. Yeah, and fire escapes just basically just head straight back up through the way that you came in, and it's over towards kind of Betty's area if it all goes very wrong, which I hope it won't. But yeah, without further ado, I'll pass on to yourself. But thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the sessions today.
Thank you. I just want to check that everyone can hear me okay at the back. Excellent, thank you. It's great to see so many people here, and hello to everybody who is online. As you know, we're here to talk about AI and its potential for social good, a panel discussion. So I'll start just by introducing the panel. There's some information about them here, but I'll start with David Beer, who has assured me it's fine to call him Dave, so I will be calling him Dave. You work here in York at the university within the Department of Sociology, and your work is really about sort of looking at how technology has transformed and can transform society. I've read quite a bit of your work around algorithms, I think a subject that you started researching maybe, what did we say, 15, 16 years ago. So you kind of have a long relationship with this subject area and watched how it has developed. Sitting next to you is Bronwyn Jones. Bronwyn, you're a translational fellow with BRAID. And BRAID are a research organisation looking at bridging responsible AI. Your particular interest, like me, you're also a journalist. So you have done a lot of research at that kind of intersection between journalism and AI within the realm of public service, which I guess we could ally to social good. And then at the end is Steve Cinderby, and Steve works with the Stockholm Environment Institute, who, despite their name, are actually at the University of York. SEI are a very large, a global research organisation in the area of sort of sustainability, climate change, and you work particularly, I think, around sustainability, around environments and how they work for people. And you've started using some AI tools, so we can talk to you about that. I think where I want to start is, if, like me, you have an interest in what is happening with AI, you tend to access that through sort of media and articles, and there's a whole kind of spectrum of views out there, which range from, you know, AI is going to lead to the end of the world, the end of mankind. At the other end, we have actually, it's a force for fantastic good, and it's going to transform all of our lives and make the world better. Now, surely the reality sits somewhere in between, but I want to start by asking the panel, where do you think we are on that continuum at the moment? I'll start with you, Dave, as you're next to me.
Yeah, I think Walter Benjamin said that we always see ourselves in the midpoint of history. That's just to start with the philosophy of history from Walter Benjamin. So probably, I think we're living with more of what we would think of as kind of AI than we imagine already. So, but some of the visions that we see, although are quite fanciful, are also powerful in shaping the direction of the future and in sort of legitimising the choices that are made in tech companies and so on about what AI and how it should be deployed. So I think at the moment, though, if we look at where we are, to answer your question, we've actually got quite advanced forms of what we might think of as artificial intelligence in the form of algorithms making lots of decisions about us and for us in our everyday lives, some of which we're aware of, some of which we don't see. And I think it's those kind of ordinary applications of those kind of decision-making bits of software that is really important for understanding the world as it is today.
I think implicit in what you say is this idea of having these different narratives is important for informing the debate about where we could go in the future.
Yes, and a lot of what we're seeing, you've got the technologies as they are, but you've also got this vision of a future that's just around the corner, just out of reach all the time, where AI will do, and then you can sort of finish the sentence with whatever the news story is. But those visions are powerful because it's those that push back the frontiers on things like what we see as acceptable, what we see as a kind of thing that we might allow to be automated in the future. So it kind of pushes back our expectations, pushes back the frontiers on development. So that although those visions might not be accurate of the world as it is today, they're going to create pathways and futures as they become implemented in different ways. Even if we never actually reach that point, they shape decisions in the present.
Bronwyn, how do you see where we are at the moment based on the work that you're doing?
Okay, so building a little bit on what Dave was saying there, I think that the imaginaries that we're creating now are incredibly important and incredibly powerful for the direction of travel. And I think where we are is in a place where a select set of voices have a lot of that power. And I think that's quite worrying. So, I mean, sessions like today and speaking to the public and connecting up communities who have a say in the future of their societies is a really important part of this debate and of the future of AI. So I actually think that although they can be very helpful in thinking through the potentialities and the potential problems that might arise so we can anticipate and mitigate risks, they're also really important for thinking about what we want, what is social good, what is, environmental good. And that's going to be built up of many conflicting at times, different ideas and different community values. And we need to find ways in our societies and our democracies to deal with that agonism and with that conflict in productive ways to ensure that AI sort of gets built out in different directions. And I think we're not there yet, most definitely. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and that involves experts as well as communities and publics like yourself.
I think we will come back to that sort of issue around who gets the power in this, and that particularly around equality. But Steve, I'll ask you that same opening question. Where do you feel that we are when you look at it from the perspective of your work?
I think it depends where you are globally in the world as well, in that a lot of the development of AI has been driven in what we often call the global north. And a lot of the benefits are currently accruing, if you see them as benefits, to the global north. I think when you move to low middle income countries, I do a lot of work across Africa and some in Asia. Depending on where you are in the continent of Africa, say, and who you're working with, some people are starting to see some benefits and potential from AI, but a smallholder farmer in rural Tanzania, I doubt they've even really contemplated what it might mean to them yet, or seen any benefits and potential from it. So, but I think they've got just as much of a valid right in shaping the direction that AI should be developing in as a decision maker sitting in an office in London, say. But at the moment, I think that power in the shaping of things is very heavily skewed to certain parts of the world and certain decision makers.
Yes, I mean, we're very aware as a panel that we're sitting here as a group of, of white people from the UK, the global north, so clearly our perspective is from our experience. But actually, in your research, I mean, there's no doubt that we are talking about AI so much now because of ChatGPT and the sheer number of people, members of the general public who have started using it. Is that the case globally? Do you meet people when you're doing work in Africa who have that same level of awareness?
I think for the wealthier people, say in Kenya, where we've got a centre, an FCI, they are aware of it. They're well connected, they've got good internet connections, good access to technology. And a lot of the development of AI, the sort of the building blocks of how we're developing these systems is actually taking place using work from Africa. So people are being paid to do the labeling of data, to train these models and train these systems. So they're aware of the systems and the technology. The problem at the moment is the benefits of that are accruing somewhere else, if you like, and the opportunities for them to actually get involved in shaping these systems and building the benefits, I think, at the moment is not well distributed. But yeah, I think in certain parts of Africa, say, with wealthier people, they're definitely using the systems and they're starting to see benefits from the systems. And I think the other aspect is I can see a lot of the innovation potential in AI coming from some of these places that currently are maybe not disadvantaged, we could say, in terms of their access, but judging by the innovative systems that a lot of African computer developers have made in the past, I can really see them moving this technology in different ways to the way we're thinking at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, generally sometimes see that, don't we? A kind of sort of a leap over the way we went to be ahead from development in the global south. I mean, we've got really onto this kind of issue with equality. Bronwyn, I know that's really at the heart of a lot of the work that you do. I mean, do you think that AI has the potential to make the world more equal or less equal?
So I think that we need to break down what we talk about when we talk about AI and lumping, so many different types of systems at work in so many different specific contexts doing different things. We need to pull that apart. Am I a little bit echoey? Is that okay for everybody? I think it must just be me here, it's fine. Yeah, so I think we need to dig into where these applications are happening and the actual effects on people. Because I think organizations who are deploying these systems or who are building these systems can have good intentions. I mean, some I imagine don't, and the profit motive is kind of driving their decision-making more than anything else. But even with good intentions, I think the implications for communities, so a lot of the testbed communities are in the global south. So not only are they like labeling for a pittance to make profit for large organizations, they're also often basically being tested on what are the harms and how can we see them and the ramifications. And so we can see that in relation to news, for example, in the mis and disinformation space, where we can see, different societies with different societal and social relations having the harm of social networks powered by AI, private networks where mis and disinformation can spread at scale, sort of undetected, because we don't really have effective, especially for generative AI outputs, deep fakes, etc. We don't really have the quality of the systems that we would need to detect them. So these are accruing harms, disproportionately accruing on marginalised communities. So it is incredibly important to take it seriously. We can see, large companies, OpenAI and others, reducing their ethics departments, and perhaps doing a little bit of what we'd call ethics washing, so pronouncing the work that they're doing to find out what the harms are, but actually not putting in place meaningful guardrails or mitigations to these harms, nor working with communities to work out what flourishing could mean for them in that space. So I think it's a really difficult question, and I guess I'm on the more critical side here, where there's a lot of people talking about the benefits and the opportunities, and I think we need more conversation about and research into evaluating those harms and implications.
And Dave, from your point of view, looking at algorithms and the impact on society, do you see that as something which is making us less equal, it's offering less opportunity to marginalised communities? What's your experience? I know you've been doing some work around algorithms in the housing market.
Yeah, that was trying to get to grips with that. I mean, I think when you think about the question of equality with AI, you've got the question of kind of decision making. So how decision making becomes black boxed within systems around social decisions of different types. So the one we were looking at is housing. So who's a house rented to? Who has access to certain housing? Who can borrow money? These sorts of decisions. So there's a lot of those types of decisions going on, and they draw upon the massive amounts of data that accumulate about people, which naturally create and cement social divisions, really, and
Yeah,
inequalities
and
within
bias,
their
potentially.
Yeah, and it can be any of those things, and you can see that they're trying to come up with solutions to that, but still they are there. You know, the kind of idea that Safi Noble's called like algorithms of oppression, things that create and perpetuate inequalities are embedded into the system. Now, one of the problems is that when decisions are made through data source in algorithmic decisions, that they become much more difficult to question because you're not quite sure how they've been made often. But similarly, the idea, we kind of trust numbers. So people can be judged through a credit score or whatever, and without a narrative going with it. So, and these decisions that are made through numbers are much more difficult to question. So you get a perpetuation, a cementing of social divisions and inequalities that's actually much more difficult to challenge. The other way you could look at inequalities, if it's okay, is just through the materiality of AI. So what you've got, if you look at something like the work of Kate Crawford on the Atlas of AI, she says that AI is like an extraction industry. So it's about whose data is extracted and controlled, Sarah Landon calls them data cartels, but it's also about where data centers are located with the degradations that they might bring. Or if you look at something like NVIDIA as a kind of, you know, the third largest company in the world as a chip maker, and it's for AI, and it's about the minerals and materials that are required to make that, which create global inequalities. So you've got, you've got a kind of materiality of inequality going on as well, I think, as well as the kind of decision-making structures that can draw lines between people and make social divisions worse.
Yeah, I think there are sort of two important strands in there, well, probably more, but particularly around data and then obviously the kind of environmental impact. And we'll certainly pick up on the environmental impact. But just on that kind of the data and the kind of what is going on sort of, you know, in the background. So you obviously firmly think that we do tend to trust AI?
Yeah. I mean, I think we can trust data even when we know it's wrong.
Okay.
So you know, we'll be at work and we know that the data that we're looking at is in some way misrepresenting us, our colleagues, our customers, whatever else it might be. But we still can go along with that because it creates a logic for us. It creates a reality that we can then respond to. So it's not, data can create these realities that we actually go along with sometimes, I think, even when we know that they're not true.
And as you say, hard to challenge.
Yeah.
And hard to challenge because you
Yeah.
can't explain
That's right. And this
how
is,
those things have
exactly.
happened.
And this is the kind of, there's you know, what's called a kind of reactivity to data gathering, which is that once we know data's being gathered in a certain way about us, we change our behavior in the way that data's being captured to suit the data structures. So, I mean, a really obvious example of this is, you know, track your own credit score. So people start changing their behaviors to get a better credit score. So it's not that these are measures of us. In the social world, when you start counting people and measuring them, you change the way they behave and you change the world that you measure in. It's a difference of the natural world in that way.
Yes, it's a constructed world through the power of algorithms.
Yeah.
I was just going to add to that. So there's an example in journalism that's quite pertinent here, which is data analytics to understand audiences. And increasingly that's fed through machine learning systems to sort of classify and cluster and better understand segments of audiences. And this is a sort of a powerful tool, but it's also a lens through which journalists are beginning to look at their publics. And it also is a mediating sort of structure in between them and their audiences. So it can have positive implications if used wisely, and the implications of using it wisely are actually more complicated than you might at first imagine. So understanding is a big barrier to sensibly using these systems. If you have an editor or a manager really keen on more clicks, and who, you know, a data science team who have decided that the metrics by which they're going to gauge whether your journalism or your article was successful are basically, did they click, how far did they scroll? Like, the depth of that information and those measures of success are very limiting and limited. And if you're a journalist who wants to do good for your community, who maybe wants to speak to a niche part of that community. Never going to be many clicks on that story, but that actually might drive a policy change or have implications for that person's life, or for a rectification of an error. You know, that's very important to traditional notions of journalism doing good in society, and those metrics can very much get in the way. And so in some ways, by extrapolating out to those levels and then handing over a part or delegating a part of that judgment and decision making to those systems, we lose a little bit of the control over what stories are seen as beneficial, and then that's a feedback loop. So then your editor says, well, that story got loads of clicks, that clickbaity story with that headline that, you know, everybody clicked on, that's not the best journalism, it's not going to drive the best journalism. So we need to think critically whenever we bring these systems into our workflows and our way of doing things. And I think, yeah, there's been a bit of a delay and a lack of tools for us to think critically in the newsroom and in other industries to be able to push back.
I wondered about that, you know, is this debate happening like too late, Steve? Do you feel like, you know, the genie is out of the bottle and we're struggling to kind of catch up, certainly as organisations, when, you know, individuals are using these tools?
I think there is to an extent, but I think it comes down a little bit to what Bronwyn was just saying, in that as people start, hopefully, as people start to learn and understand what these systems are capable of, but also how they can introduce these biases, we can get cleverer at understanding the repercussions of that and change the way we're using them. Because, you know, I'm not sure you can blame the technology per se for these issues. It's how it's being deployed and the choices being made about how it's being deployed. Not necessarily the concept by itself, it's how we're choosing to use it that I think is the issue.
It's part of the problem though, and it's like a very simplistic example. I mean, it's a tool, but if I have a screwdriver in my hand and I'm operating the screwdriver, I know what it's doing. If I have a generative AI tool in my hand, I don't actually know what it's doing. And, you know, so having systems to kind of, you know, robustly control it, we can only do so much, can't we?
I agree. I think it's just that educational step of realising what you've just described, that this black box has given, as David said, this black box has given us this answer, and then being much more critical and scrutiny on it from us as to what it's actually saying and what it might mean and how it might have been generated.
Yeah, I read there's some research that came out today from Reuters Institute, and they have prompted ChatGPT and Gemini to give news headlines, which to me seems a fairly simple task. And what's happened is, like, I think it was ChatGPT gave non-news content more than 50% of the time, and I think for Gemini it was about 90% of the time. So you're like, well, surely we cannot trust. We cannot trust the LLMs, large language models, and the chatbots are actually, you know, delivering anything like the truth. So I'm going to pass to Bronwyn, you know, as someone with a journalism background. I mean, I was really shocked that the level of accuracy was so low for what we're told the most sophisticated large language models or chatbots, you know, as ChatGPT and Gemini are, but yet they are so inaccurate. And we can prove it for that, but for other things we can't.
So I think there's a big question about how we perceive the large language models and generative AI in general, and how they're being sold by businesses that want to sell them. And I think that the sort of the ideas, the anticipation of what they could do in future is being sold as a reality right now, which is really problematic. It doesn't help common sense understandings of what they can and can't do. And so language models are not reasoning models. They're not models for truth, and they are not models even for evidence. They fabricate information, often called hallucination. They also make up citations, and they can send you to a link to something that does not, you know, show any of the evidence they purport that it shows. Yeah. So these are all like limitations that are not going to go away, even with the improved quality of those models, because of the underlying architecture of the models. They predict the next word in a sentence or the next part of a sentence. They're predictive mathematical modelling systems. They're not reasoning systems. So one of the big tasks to get our heads around is like, what is that useful for and what isn't it useful for?
Yeah.
What's appropriate and what's not? And how can we create governance systems, distributed governance systems across societies, in industries that might want to apply these things to ensure they're not used inappropriately? And it sounds to me like asking it to gather news and be factually correct is not an appropriate use of a large language model.
They're not knowledge and facts. They're about, as you say, predicting. Yeah. And you're right. If we then try and use them in different ways that they're not built for, then we are going to have problems, aren't we? We're asking them to do something they can't do. So in with all this issue about what have they been trained on, we're going to apply them in situations that are not appropriate. I think it would be good to hear from all three of you of examples that you have seen within your work of where AI tools are being used in what we could deem to be a positive way. Steve, I'll start with you because I know you've been doing a lot of work recently.
Yeah, so I'm working on a variety of different things. So one of the projects I've got going on at the moment with the University of York and colleagues in Edinburgh and Cranfield has been looking at so-called foundation industries in the UK. So I didn't know what foundation industries when this started, but foundation industries are the industries in the UK that are making the raw materials that then get used into lots of other things. So we're talking about metals, we're talking about ceramics, we're talking about bulk chemicals, we're talking about cement and concrete. So those kinds of materials. And we've been working with those industries across the country, and one of the areas they're trying to move into now is much more increased use of AI in their production processes. And it can provide multiple benefits. So for example, in like metal production, it can start to optimize the actual use of the raw materials to begin with. Then you can start to control the furnaces much more accurately to maximize the actual production quality of the steel or the metal that you're trying to make. And then it can control things like the cooling process and the energy use of the plant as well. So any of those things can bring real benefits for both the industry but also the environment. So we cut down on the use of raw materials and the wastage. If we start saving energy in actually how hot the kilns of the furnaces are running, again, massive energy savings, massive CO2 savings. So the potential benefits environmental from that are huge. And if you apply that globally, thinking of all the raw material production that takes place, if these tools start to become pervasive in the industries and used routinely, could see big gains that way. So there's those kinds of big industry benefits, I think. Then on another level, one of the big tasks we have now is, in a changing climate, is the monitoring and evaluation of the planet and how things are evolving. So one of the things AI is really good at is looking for patterns in data and assessing change. We obviously collect lots of remote sensing data from airborne surveillance, different types of sensors and monitors, telling us all kinds of things. Historically, that was down to scientists often. So I don't know whether he remembers, I think it was maybe 1 or 2 years ago, these discovery of new penguin colonies in the Antarctic by people looking at air photography, satellite images, looking for them in places they thought they might be based on scientific understanding, and looking for the actual dots of birds and the mess that they make of the ice to identify these colonies. And they discovered 3 or 4 new big colonies of emperor penguins that hadn't been known to science. That's the sort of thing AI would be really good at doing, and replacing scientists doing it and taking a long time, to be looking for changes in the way our environment's evolving. Maybe some for the good, but also looking for problems like deforestation, or being able to predict where droughts might be about to occur and food famine might be about to occur in particular reasons, so that we could intervene earlier in those kind of processes. So yeah, there's just some examples, I think, of where AI and environment, it can be used beneficially.
So there's a very much, to me, examples where you're automating something which was a human process, but you're still keeping the human there to ultimately decide what comes out of that work. You're not handing it all over. And I guess that's, as Bronwyn said, making this, making the difference between what is generative AI, when you're actually asking it to generate something new, and the sort of AI tools that you're talking about, which are literally about taking something which is a fairly mundane and routine task and can be automated. Now, I know, obviously, within journalism, Bronwyn, that's something we've seen as well. Are there other examples? Is there anything in the kind of generative AI space that you've seen and thought that is a really good use of generative AI? Or is it still in that kind of rules-based AI space?
No, so I'd say there's more examples of, prior models because we've had them for so long and people have been, playing around with them and putting them to good use for such a long time. I could give more examples in the pre-Gen AI space, but that said, there are people really thinking through how they can be best used and with a recognition of the limitations. So exploring data sets, so not necessarily like public-facing, audience-facing, or content generation and automation, whereby you're creating an article. This is an area which is like high risk for news and probably not a very good, application area right now. But in the back end, there are lots and lots of processes that, generative AI can be assistive in. Mm-hmm. So there's a really good blog, actually, Generative AI in the Newsroom, which is Nick Diakopoulos at Northwestern University in the US, and he's sort of been gathering together examples. A couple of them have been digging into data sets. So, a good example of pre-generative AI was the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers. You have these massive either data leaks or data sets that manually you wouldn't get through in years and years, and people are expecting, news stories coming out of this day by day. And so, using these models to classify, so optical character recognition plus, computer vision plus classification models to be able to extract data, analyze data, search for things that you think are going to be useful in, investigating fraud or corruption internationally, and combining across nations to do these kinds of investigations. Like, they're great examples. Generative AI does actually have a use in these spaces as well. The ability to query data using natural language. So prior to current iterations of generative AI, you would have to have a decent knowledge of programming language. You'd have to have somebody who could understand data science. You'd be compiling sort of large multidisciplinary teams really to do this work. And I think one of the benefits generative AI might bring is, an ability to query data in a natural language, interface. There are lots of good examples.
Yes, I've seen in the sort of generative AI space using that for kind of translation. Yeah. So in other words, you can make your articles more accessible to different audiences. I've also seen actually the use of sort of generative video to create a sign language. So a really good way of actually reaching an audience of people who are hearing impaired in their own language. So there do seem to be a lot of possibilities. Dave, is there anything you've come across in your work that strikes you as being something which is having a positive impact?
I think the things that Bronwyn and Steve are pointing towards about the ability to find patterns where beyond human consciousness is kind of where it is. And I think the healthcare will be one area where you'll see a lot of very rapid developments in that sense. If we were separating out the kind of generative AI, I've seen it be competent at a lot of things. Okay. Or mildly competent.
Mildly competent.
I've heard Kurt Cobain singing ABBA and all that kind of stuff, and it's fine, and the writing is fine, but it's I think that's kind of those technologies. I think are kind of pathway type technologies that you'll see areas of investment going into because they exist, that will then lead to the actual kind of significant move forward in the forms of generative AI. But they aren't quite there, I don't think, at the moment. But I think a lot of the breakthroughs will be in that kind of pattern recognition.
Which
that's
actually
where I think it will be.
is something that's been with us for a while, but we're just improving it all the time.
Yeah, because the scale of your data sets you're working with and the ability to use them, I think the translation one's a really good example as well, because that is moving significantly fast, I think. And the neural network technology underpinning that is the same neural network technology underpinning a lot of the generative AI developments more broadly.
Well, just one thing I was going to add there. When we talk about these applications of AI and we talk about sustainability as well, I think there are going to be questions about when and how we use the systems, because we know they have a carbon footprint.
Well, that's what I was going to go on to.
Great, sorry.
Yeah, just picking up on it's great that we can have Kurt Cobain singing ABBA, but, well, I've not heard it. It might not be great. But, people sitting at home, playing with generative AI tools has an impact in terms of using resources. You know, this is not something which doesn't take a lot of electricity, you know, a lot of water, a lot of resources. You know, I think the estimates, there are different estimates, but, you know, by 2026, data processing centres will use 1,000 terawatts of electricity. That's equivalent to the consumption of Japan, the electricity consumption. So there is a massive environmental impact. You know, how do we approach that? We can't stop people using these tools, can we? Oh, Dave, you can. You brought up Kurt Cobain, so I'll ask you first. Should we stop people doing that?
You can't copyright a voice, apparently. That's the story behind the Kurt Cobain thing. That's why. What's going to the advances in AI, particularly in generative AI, require greater levels of data than currently exist and are currently being processed. So the only way that you're going to see advances in any kind of generative AI are if you have advances in the volume and processing of data. So that's going to only require extensions of that data infrastructure.
So that's more electricity,
exactly,
more water for cooling, more minerals for chips, all of that.
Yeah, these are very hot, these data centres, very hot, aren't they, as we know? So the water consumption is very high. Now, the things that aren't, you can't disconnect them. If there's going to be advances in AI, there will be advances, there will be extensions of the data infrastructure. There are choices there to be made. So in the UK, the government policies were a #1 data set, data destination kind of thing is in the policy around data. Now, what that means, I don't know, but in terms of data structures, I think we'll see them advancing more quickly than that suggestion around the electric use that you've already looking at there. That will advance more quickly than that, I suspect.
Stu, I mean...
It's not sustainable, is it?
Exactly. I mean, you do a lot of work in different countries. I mean, you will see that already, resources like water are potential for sort of flashpoints. I mean, this becomes a geopolitical issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think, as David was saying, where we're locating those centres as well and the resources they require, again, is something that needs careful consideration because, as you've just said, Jane, a lot of areas in like middle-income countries, particularly with the emerging climate emergency, they're already water stressed. They're already, and energy is often disproportionately available to an elite rather than the majority. So if you're sucking even more energy to be used in powering these systems and disadvantaging other groups, I think, it's a huge potential for conflict going forward. And I suspect it's something that those agencies that are developing them must be concerned about because, we've seen flashpoints of conflict around the globe recently. It could easily happen over these kinds of resources as well, I would think, and they'd be a prime target for certain people, I would say.
So this becomes a government issue?
I would think so, yeah. An international issue, because we're all, wherever they're located, everybody potentially is accessing, using those same systems. They're distributed. So, it becomes a critical piece of infrastructure potentially.
And do you think, do you get a sense those conversations are happening on an international level about the resource impact?
I think the things to do with those resource extraction and the energy use and water, those kinds of issues, yes. But I think these sort of more political dimensions, I think we're just starting to get. I think the awareness of it is probably a lot less amongst a whole range of people, including our key decision makers and politicians, and the sort of implications of it. I mean, the closest proxy I can see is, global positioning satellite systems now. People think, they're just used for, we all love being able to see where we are on our phones
Google
and in
Maps.
the car. But those clocks that are in those systems are integral to huge amounts of infrastructure, like our electricity networks. They're in healthcare, in hospitals, to run all those systems as well and get the technology to work. So if you started knocking out GPS systems, it isn't just you lose your Google Maps application. Potentially you kill off a huge amount of really critical infrastructure. And AI could potentially be the next sort of piece of that kind of jigsaw of is critical to so many things that it becomes vital to protect.
Yeah,
in some way.
It feels to me that you could set out to use a tool for social good, but actually all this environmental impact that we're talking about means that actually you end up not doing that.
Definitely. I think that rolling out these systems before the kinds of evaluations and work's been done on them to make sure that they're safe and to make sure that the implications aren't the kind of negative ones that we're anticipating seeing and already seeing. I think actually making them infrastructural is a power play on the part of the big organisations that release them. I don't think it's an accident that they're going to become infrastructural to communications, for example. And so I think we have to look at that in light of it as a strategy. I also think that, so for example, there's a deliberate non-monitoring of the water and carbon footprint by these organisations, and they don't release this data, and they know their own models inside out. So there are other choices that are being made by companies, and if we talk about global regulation, these are the kinds of areas they can step in and say, just for quite standard corporate responsibility reasons, we mandate that you make this public and inspectable and scrutinised so that you could be held to account. These are decisions that governments and global decision-making bodies could be making right now on behalf of the public, but sadly it's a bit maybe slower.
I mean, David, it sort of reminds me really of where we were with the platforms when it came to regulation.
Yeah.
Does what happens around the regulation of social media platforms give us any hope that we will take a different path when it comes to regulating AI?
So the problem with social media platforms is always that they're bigger than nation states.
Yes.
So, and they spread across, in some cases, hundreds of nation states. So regulatory structures are always a problem. There's a book by Jamie Susskind which talks about this kind of patchwork of regulatory structures that you end up with in social media because of that. But there's also the power of having populations that are bigger than nation states being regulated as well. So it does because you're similar. I think probably because you're looking at some of the same structures are embedded in AI as were in those platforms, and it's the same organisations. So if you look at the patents around AI, they're coming from a lot of those are coming from the same big tech companies, including Tencent in China as well. So you've got these kind of like developments occurring through the same tech infrastructures, I think, probably, with the same regulatory problem of how do you actually have any kind of unified regulation of these.
And we haven't solved that, have we?
No, I don't know how much. I don't know how much desire there is to solve it. Actually, you don't see it a lot. I mean, whenever you do see it, it's to do with tax takes, probably. But I think in terms of the regulation of social media platforms, we've never really seen any sustained attempts. I know people would point to the kind of EU regulatory structures, but you can see that you see that the platform isn't regulatable in the same way, or can be. You've had other instances where people have nation states have attempted to impose regulations but struggle to do so.
Well, I think, as you say, they struggle because the platforms are bigger than a nation state. So one nation state is not going to be able to impact. But I mean, is that, Bronwyn, is that something that we should be worried about if we're talking about this concept of AI for social good, that potentially we don't have a way of regulating the tech companies?
I think, I think it's absolutely the central thing that we should be looking at, and as universities and others that receive funding, much like in the eras gone by in the tobacco industry, etc., where money flows to do research into these areas from the companies themselves. I think there are some risks in that, and some issues associated with that. But I think that we should be studying up, so looking at where the power is held, and where we can best use our agency as, either academics or people within industries. And I also think there are elements of what can organisations themselves be doing, and how can they look at their own practices, how can they present best practice for their industry, for example. So I'm not here speaking today on behalf of the BBC, but obviously the BBC has an interest in ensuring that its broadcast capabilities are as sustainable as they can be. And I was just talking to businesses on Wednesday. We had a gathering talking about very similar topics as today. And a very small design agency was saying, they developed a set of policies to ensure that they stay within their sustainability goals. And that involved not using any generative AI frivolously. And so they had a big discussion within their small team about what's frivolity in this situation. We have to play with it to work out how it works and what the limitations are. So there's an element of need there. But we don't want people just generating pictures of something funny and sending, because we know the carbon footprint. And, so people are having serious conversations in their organisations about it. And I think if we can map that across all levels, they aren't the people with power, but they're trying to do as much as they can in their remit. And we can have those conversations all the way up to the top and take these issues seriously.
I'm pleased to hear that is in somebody's AI regulations, because I've read a lot of company AI regulations, and very rarely do I see anything which is about carbon footprint and the frivolous use of it. There are lots of all the other transparency and ethical issues are in there, but that environmental impact is often missing. And am I understanding you right in that you're almost saying by a kind of, if we all work together with this, by the kind of strength of a collective action, we might be able to make an influence?
Very close to that. I think it's going to be distributed collective action. So I think it's going to be lots of different groups with different voices. People are active for their own agendas, understandably, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I do think there's going to be a need for directing that agency and that collective voice. But I don't think that we can all come to one consensus about what social good is or what the next steps for AI are. I just think we should have productive argument about it, and then deliberation. Because public opinion is one thing, but you need to turn that into public will to change. And when we talk about public, we talk about publics. So I just think the diversity is a positive thing, but the power still rests within this sort of small group.
But do we, as a society, as a sort of communities, have some power in our data? Because those tech organisations need our data. They can't do anything without it. Is that a route into perhaps getting back some of that power? I'll put that to you, Dave, as algorithms and power.
I've always thought it was a kind of interesting trick of the social media companies, that they make you work for them producing content for their site, and at the same time they extract your data so they can then use that to target content.
There's a reason why ChatGPT was released free to so many people, because they're getting a lot of training data back.
Back out of its own.
So do we have to stop doing that? Do we have to make the data the way that we push back?
My thought on social media was that they should have created them as mutual, so they're owned by their workers, which is essentially people who use the social media platform. That would have made the whole regulation a lot easier of those platforms. But that's never going to happen, is it? What was the question, Jane? Sorry, I lost myself thinking back to the good old days of imagining a better future.
I'm just wondering whether, because it does feel like it's a very unequal power relationship between us and the tech giants.
It's about our data,
But is there something around our data that governments and national organisations could do? I mean, I'm thinking, obviously with my journalism head on, I know a lot of media organisations have said, we're not going to allow our data to be scraped. You are not going to get our data for free. Does that have to be part of the fight back? Steve's got a...
It was just, I was watching somebody else on a panel talking about this kind of topic, but in relation to Africa and AI in Africa. And the challenge with AI in Africa is, because there's the way the data has currently been scraped for AI, and also because of historical imbalances in data creation, there's a lot less data being used in the modelling and the development of these models that's generated from Africa for Africa. But because of that, the agencies have got wind of the potential now, and they're trying to put blocks in, just like you said, Jane, in terms of what can be scraped, what data can be made available. So they've got much more control about how these models are developed. And I appreciate, like David saying, that for for most of us, that ship might have sailed to some extent, and we're kind of working for the machine now. But but there is the potential there, I think, to put these blocks in place, or at least have more control and say in what happens.
I think both of those things reflect the logic that the value of the data is the thing to be protected. And if you look at the transformation in capitalism over that period, over the last 20 years, a lot of the biggest data, the companies in the world, the value of those companies is in the data they hold. So that's not going to be easily transformed. But at the same time, you get sort of smaller organisations wanting to control the data that they're producing because they know its value now. Yeah. So it kind of moved towards a kind of data capitalism, really, in which the value is held in data. So the logic is always to protect the data in some way. I think we see the same logic underpinning what Steve said there and what the tech companies are doing.
I mean, that's a really smart move, isn't it? You know that the models are certainly biased because they're trained on, on often Common Crawl and just what's out there on the internet, which invariably is, is kind of global north. So they are doing exactly what I asked, what I said, could people do? They're noticing that their data is not being put into these models. So they're saying, no, hang on a minute.
Yeah, we want some control.
We want some control. I suppose the question is, can they get that control? Can they stop their data being scraped?
Yeah, or can they develop an Africa-centric version of this that's using Africa data for African benefit?
Well, countries are developing their own large language models. We know that as, I think, a way of trying to understand what training data there is. I mean, Bronwyn, is that a sensible strategy?
I think it depends who's doing it and what their underpinning values and aims are. So I think just because another country is doing it for their own nation does not mean that they're not being extractive, that they're not surveilling by their data collection practices, all these different things. So it's very much dependent on that. And we have few ways to hold people to account currently because it's a commercialised system in a capitalist environment, which allows for those things to happen without public scrutiny or significant amounts of democratic control. So
you're suggesting we can't necessarily trust governments and nations?
Not governments and nations. You shouldn't necessarily be trusting companies either. But that sounds really pessimistic. But I think the other side of that coin is there are so many great people working on different forms of mobilising data for people. So it's not completely one-sided, and there are different. This isn't my specialist area, but different data collectives and different way of conceiving of data than as extractive sort of money-making practices.
There's definitely something around data, isn't there? Nadine has moved into my eye line, so I suspect that means it's time to go to some questions. Yeah, we're happy to take some questions. Nadine has a microphone, so if anyone is itching to ask the panel.
Oh, no. I recognise Tom.
Oh.
That's
Here's
better,
now, yeah.
but I always end up asking the first question. Bronwyn, I was very interested in what you said about this organisation that had written no frivolous use into its policy. But then you immediately said afterwards, but of course they need to play with it to find out what it can do and what good uses there are. And this leads me to a huge puzzle I have. I mean, is this the first technology we have developed of a major scale that we don't actually know what it's good for yet? And we're spending vast amounts of time, energy and resource hoping it's going to be good for something. And perhaps we should just stop.
I don't think it's the first technology that's been the case. I think the companies who developed it, they have real big ideas about what they think it could do. And I think that they're being very strategic about how they use their releases and then how other people can iterate on top of it and, build on top of it, much like the platform economy that was built out to be so. But I also think previous technologies have often developed in that way, and we can't always anticipate what technologies will be used for. And I think that you raise a really important question about refusal, the ability to say no or to live without and to choose to live without and make that a positive choice for people. It feels at the moment in organisations, particularly post-ChatGPT, in any communication organisation, there's this pressure that you should be using it, you have to be using it, you have to be first in the game, all of this. And that leads to really poor, I think, decision making. So those that are stepping back and saying, in the long scheme of history, you know, we should be taking the time to really think through sensible uses and whether we use it at all for certain things. I don't like the deterministic narrative that sort of says, this is it now, deal with it, or, you know, build upon it. But there is an element of pragmatism that sort of, well, it is here and it's not going away, and actually our governments and our, you know, industries are sort of jumped on board. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the refusal thing feels a bit like putting your head in the sand and hoping it goes away. And I just don't think that's an option. I'm interested what Steve and Dave think.
Yeah, I mean, just in relation to this, I mean, my own background was actually I'm a geographer. My background was in remote sensing, so using satellite imagery. I'm old enough that I remember when it was first evolving, and remote sensing people could tell you it would do anything. We'd be able to measure everything and anything. And they sold it on those terms, and then obviously it can't. But then the users that had been missold almost became very distrustful of remote sensing for quite a long period of time. And I've got a suspicion that there might be a backlash that way, that when we realise that some of the results coming out of ChatGPT or AI in general aren't fit for purpose, for a while at least there'll be I won't say moratorium, but there'll be a lull in the interest and the demand for it as we become distrustful and questioning more. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing at all in this context, because I think the challenge I see is all of us catching up with the understanding of what is this technology, and like you said, is it good for anything or is it good for nothing? And that's kind of the onus on us to educate ourselves a bit better. Like perhaps we should have done more with social media before it proliferated so spectacularly.
But we can't just put the brakes on, can we? I mean, the brakes, there isn't a brake, is there?
It's interesting what the frivolous use, the idea of the kind of play till you find out what it does. And that, you know, that I think there's a kind of culture and logic of that in the tech sector around. When you look at the buildings they're in, you know, for a start, you know, these kind of playful spaces.
Yes.
You know, you can see
Soul
the
table
cultures
football and
here's a
beanbag.
slide, you know, or whatever, you know. But there's that, but the data infrastructures were based on that logic, because a lot of the time they're gathering data for no sense of what it's used for, you know, totally different to the kind of history of social statistics. You're gathering data, they've no idea what it's used for, and then try and retro-engineer a use for that data in afterwards by playing with the data until you got it. Before Spotify, Last FM was a kind of music downloading space, and they actually had a playground, you know, where you could go and play with the user's data to create visualizations of music genre and stuff like that. So I wonder if that kind of that sort of culture of play is embedded in the whole sector.
Isn't that to make it feel safe as well? It's not threatening. Isn't that a little bit about, don't worry about it, it's just all fun.
Yeah, I'd call that kind of crewneck capitalism. Okay. You know, the idea is kind of this faux, sort of friendly, casual air that accompanies quite significant and very serious.
I think that was it's the Silicon Valley sort of culture, wasn't it? That's what it was born out of.
Yeah.
We have another one from the floor, and then I'm going to come online and read one or two of the online questions, and then we come back to the floor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so this might come a little bit out of left field, and it also may speak to the play comment, because I understand that in the history of computing, it's been a strategy for a long time to make computerized systems look innocent by creating games with them. And I'm wondering if there is a problem in how we're thinking about these AI capabilities, as the panel have been discussing, thinking of it as a tool, as a screwdriver, and locating the authority and responsibility for the effects of that screwdriver either in the user or in the corporate legal person that owns and develops it. Do we need to radically rethink what agents are responsible for these technologies?
I mean, I don't think we were saying, that it isn't,
good.
it isn't just in a limited number of hands. I think the answer is probably yes, but I'll let...
No, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question
Yes.
to which, I don't have an answer, and
Yeah.
but raising the question and the distribution of responsibility and how we conceive of what has agentic properties and what they mean in both how we regulate and how we conceive of like moral responsibility. Again, it's not my specialist area, but it's an area that needs much further development, and actually we need to find consensual ways of talking about where the responsibility lies. I don't think that necessarily, so I'm really interested in the analogies that people use. So with the ChatGPT, it's just like a calculator but for language, and I'm like, there are so many issues there with that analogy, but I hear it from lots more people that I talk to just in the pub and things like this. And I think, so again, I'm not going to go on a tirade about why and how that's problematic, but I think that the technology as tool, it has its uses when talking to people about what it can, but it's also hugely limited. So those analogies can be problematic in the public mind, I think, as well. And we should talk more about that. Where responsibility lies is also, so much of the devil is in the detail of terms of service. And lots of organisations are finding that. So in negotiating in an asymmetrical power relationships with a large organisation that's providing, for example, a large language model, they're finding, that you're giving over data even when you're buying licensed models for your organisation. For example, they're having to put restrictions on where that data can go, where the servers are based. They might be based in the US, you might be based in the EU, and there might be general data protection regulation implications to that. So the complexities of that concept of attribution of responsibility, at the moment, the terms and service of generative AI models basically put it on the user.
Yeah.
The user may be an organisation or an individual journalist, and all of the legal implications of that, fall on your shoulders. But you're encouraged to play with it and do what you will with it, and we're not putting the safeguards around it. And I think that's like hugely problematic. We're not really seeing the cases coming to law courts yet because of that. But I think
we will.
We will do, exactly.
I mean, that's happening. I think you're right. The kind of tool thing is a useful analogy at the point of sort of delivery. But what you have to remember is behind that, as you say, is a whole load of complexity.
Definitely. Some people have compared it to, the argument, guns don't kill people, people kill people.
Yeah.
And how we've picked that argument apart. I think we do need to do the same thing for these.
Yes, yeah. It's much more complex, but it's such a fascinating point. And as I say, the answer to your question has to be yes, but quite what that yes looks like, I think, is a debate that needs to happen.
The opening point about the interface, that it looks so slick, and you can't even, I think it's partly the responsibility, but also you just can't imagine the processing that's going on behind it. It looks like it's just arriving out of the ether, doesn't it? And it's like so the slickness of it is an important part of how these technologies operate. But responsibility is also a defense that's made for integrating these technologies. So if you take something like OpenAI and ChatGPT, well, what they're saying is, well, the responsible thing for us to do is, because we've made this amazing breakthrough, we need to make it available to humanity. So you'll get that. So actually, the responsibility question is quite interesting in the way it's operationalized to defend certain actions as well, or to extend the use of AI.
Well, that happened with social media.
I don't agree with them, by the way.
But it happened with social media as well, didn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly the same tactic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we say, well, we need to let humanity connect.
Yeah.
So then this allows you all to connect, as if connection is the ultimate thing that anybody wants to achieve. So that thing those ideas can be operationalised in the opposite direction to the way we think. But I don't have an answer about who's responsible, though, but I think that's like a really... I'll have a think about
That's
it.
another panel discussion, isn't it? I think.
Nadine, there's
a future one. Do we have some questions online?
Yeah, there are a couple online. Charlie said, but there are also massive advancements being made in the energy efficiency of the CPU, GPUs, and over time, more of the electricity will come from renewable energy. So, question to you, panel. Aren't you being a bit pessimistic about resource use and implications?
Oh, it's a fair question.
Steve, I'm going to go to you.
I think it's the timeline of, I appreciate what's been said there, but I think there's a timeline to that in terms of we're already in a climate emergency.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we're talking about a 30-year time horizon to get some ultra low energy consumption, tiny environmental footprint in terms of the resources used to produce it, we haven't got 30 years anymore. You know, when I started looking at climate change issues, it all seemed a long way away. Now, well, we're seeing it emerging already, and the implications of some of the changes that are coming are truly scary. So I don't think we've got long enough to wait for that kind of innovation. I mean, I agree you can start powering the things from renewable energy, but I've just written a paper looking at agricultural development in Africa using distributed solar panels, and the majority of people in sub-Saharan Africa aren't on a grid. They haven't got energy, particularly in rural areas. So the concept that we're going to prioritise running a data farm for ChatGPT versus providing greater access to energy for people that currently have got none, I think, again, it's one of those moral questions that we ought to be having a debate about, that I know where I would stand on it at the moment.
It's about the demand, isn't it? Everybody wants renewable energy, because for lots of the industrial processes that we need, in order for them to decarbonise, they need those renewable sources of energy. So there's going to be increased competition. So we may have more renewables, but is it actually going to be enough to even meet things like what we need to make steel and cement, you know, to build homes for people? So I think it is about that. If everything else was equal, then maybe that could be a solution, but everything isn't equal. We've got this increased pressure on us having more and more renewables.
I have one more question online, and then the final question will come from the room. I want to finish on that. But first, the online question. I already saw an arm going up really eager, so I'm going to remember that in a second. I will shorten the question a bit. So Clifford online said, I've been very concerned about the handling of AI problems. Whether AI could be pro-devil advocacy or the good guy side of life. So what is the panel suggesting? What could be the solution? So is it really the negative side, so the pro-devil side? Is it going to be bad for all of us? Or how do we make sure that it's not becoming the bad thing? So the devil side. So how can we ensure that?
Well, I'm a social scientist, so it's not really my job. So I'd sort of think...
You'll give us the options.
I'll look at... I try and approach these things ambivalently and then think, well, how is it actually shaping the world? What's going on? How are values, norms changing? How are social structures altered by these things? And trying to understand those, and then might make some decisions about that. But I don't think you could, for the reason about the point about responsibility, for example, it'd be very difficult to say it would go one of those kind of binary directions. I think you're more likely to see combinations of uses that in some cases resolve problems in the healthcare service, whilst in other cases create severe problems that we would want to move away from. So you'll get combinations of those things. That's why I always think these systems are always going to be tense. So that my recent work's been about the tensions of algorithmic thinking. So in other words, how you actually can't, those things are always going to be in tension with one another. Do you have more or less human in the system? Can you have more or less knowledge in the way that we come to conclusions? So there's always going to be tensions there that are unresolvable, and these things will be used in different ways in combination. So the reason I couldn't answer the question is because I don't think it will go in one of those two directions. That's why it'll,
Would you agree, Ron? It's not a binary question. It's about context, it's about time, place, so many different
Definitely, and
things.
I think the tension point is really important there. I think that I'm not saying everything will have a balance and be in equilibrium. I'm just saying that the negative effects will impact different people disproportionately, and some people might never feel those effects and feel like, actually, this is wonderful, this is great for society, etc., whilst completely ignoring the impacts on others. And that's what we've done in the past, and I imagine that's what we'll do in the future. But I also think, whose problem is it? Well, I actually think it's everyone's problem, and everyone can do something in response to it. And I think there's an analogy there that may be useful in this one small area, which is in relation to climate and ecological change. I think we've all come to a kind of conclusion that there are things that we can do about it, very small things that contribute, but just feeling like you have an element of agency in that space is really important. And I also think in the kind of neoliberal society that we work in currently, there's an individualisation which is very negative, but this is a side to that individualisation that can be helpful and progressive. You have a voice in your union about how your profession deals with AI. Use it. You have a voice in your organisation and amongst your friends in the pub to ensure, like you've been here today, are you going to go to the pub and then say, well, these are the issues I heard about that I'm not reading about in the paper maybe? Yeah. That kind of thing.
That's a positive note that we can have agency in this. We don't have to feel despair and that it's all racing out of control and there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, on the non-binary side of it, is it good, is it bad? When I was researching some stuff on this, one of the examples that came up was a developer, AI developer in South Africa, had developed an app to use your mobile phone to record you doing a dance routine to see how well you were doing the dance routine. So that's on your frivolous end of the spectrum, where you'd think, well, that's a complete waste of the technology. With a subtle tweak of that algorithm, they can use the same approach of looking at how the body's moving and characterising that to identify people with early stage Parkinson's disease. So it's a really complex thing about which is the devil, which is the angel in this system. And I think, as Bronwyn's saying, I think there's two levels. One is we've all got an onus, I think, to get our knowledge up to spec on this technology and these approaches so that we can have agency and can make ethical or non-frivolous choices, and then as Bronwyn's saying as well, a bit like climate change, also lobby for bigger organisations, be it where you work or national governments or whoever, to be making the right choices or better choices in this area.
And this is something that's going to continue.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, ad infinitum. You know, we're never going to come to the end of this, I think, to come to that binary decision.
Yeah.
Okay, we have... Yeah, I'm running around. We have one more question over here. The lady was the fastest one. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for all the information. It's absolutely overwhelming. And I sense that we all come here today with our own agendas which skew the questions that you've been asked. The question I would like to ask you, and it's an option, so you've got two. One is, what is the question that you would have loved to have been asked, or the one that really would have made you curious and really like sparked us, or which is the question that you would dread being asked, and could you choose which one you answer?
The dread question is, how does a neural network work? That's one I dread. But
I would never ask that.
no, fortunately, that's the end, isn't it? So, that.
Yeah, technical questions, yeah, I dread also. But I also dread the kind of, why are you allowed to talk on this topic, which I've had before. You're a social scientist, you're a journalist, you know, why should I listen to you? And I dread that because I think it's quite alienating and exclusionary, as if, you know, I couldn't bring my expertise to bear in this space, because I think the technical at times is pushing other voices out. So the Bridging Responsible AI Divides programme is about bringing the arts and humanities and the critical discourses and the understanding of human life and human flourishing. That includes law, you know, all these different sides of the conversation, and bringing them in to improve how technologies are developed and to really think more holistically how they could be better developed. So, but I do dread being asked, like, well, you're not an expert in this field, you know, why are you here?
There is a kind of assumption that to understand AI, you have to understand the tech. Yeah. And you absolutely don't. And I think that is part of the kind of black boxing of it. They're like, you don't look at that, you don't understand that, that's nothing to do with you. I think you're right. And silencing of voices because you don't have the right technical expertise. But as you said, we all need to be part of this conversation because it will have a fundamental impact on society. What's your dreaded question?
Oh, so it would definitely have been on, can you start differentiate between large language models and generative AI and GAMs and all these other different technical terms that I was trying to memorize before this, that I'm like, I'm not really sure I could explain any of that to anybody in an audience like yourselves. I think the question that intrigues me is just around environment and environmental change and this kind of pattern recognition as to whether we could use systems perhaps not built yet. Maybe I'm thinking of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the level 42 answer. Can this system come up with a really novel solution to the kind of massive environmental challenges we've got that gives us an equitable, distributed solution to some of these challenges? I don't think we're anywhere near that yet, but
a little bit of excitement about the possibilities
possibly,
that actually, some of those fundamental questions that we're facing, AI could help us with those.
Okay.
Are we out of time?
You are out of time, so I'd like to start with a big applause for our panel. I'm sorry I had to stop the grilling. I can see a lot of people were still very keen to ask questions, especially in the room. The ones online will try to pass on to the panel and get some answers for you. The one in the room, remember those faces. You get a couple of minutes to hunt them down and ask your questions directly. So they will stick around. We promised them a drink, so they'll stick around. I'm just quickly going to wrap up the event because, as most of you probably know by now, I'm very German. I'm trying to finish on time, hence stopping the Q&A at this point. So just to let people know, so some of you are new in the room, but some have been here for a while. So this was our final event in a series of 6. Anyone who's interested to maybe watch some of the other videos, there are QR codes available. They're all recorded, as you can see. We have experts in the room. To kind of share this kind of knowledge. So we have seen people in the past. I will email the recording of the session including the slides to everyone who's signed up on Eventbrite, so you will get them. So me going through them doesn't mean I'm hiding it from you. You will get it, I promise. Otherwise, send me an email. So here is the QR code again. I got a couple of complaints from online before because I didn't use a mic at the beginning, so they couldn't hear me. So here's again the QR code to leave us some feedback. It's very valuable for us. We put these on for you guys for free, but a lot of time and money went into them in a way. So please scan them, leave us some feedback we can work with. And everyone who still wants a certificate, scan it now. It's your second to last chance for the day. Just very briefly, I want to kind of highlight, there were some really good questions in the room, and there are still so many more questions to come. You are not alone with your questions, as you can see by looking around, and it's such a diverse group of people who are interested. There are some people within my school who are currently working on projects in this area. One is sitting in the back, and I'll point her out when her slide comes up. But some other colleagues are looking in the area as well. So if this particular area is something of interest, you obviously can contact the panelists, but also some of my direct colleagues who are currently working in the field. So Beatrice is sitting in the back. She's hiding behind her laptop. So if you want to hunt her down, she can answer some question. She's working with the BBC on some stuff. Just kind of mentioning it here. Some other colleagues who couldn't sadly make it today are Professor Philip Garrett and Alison Wallace. So please reach out. You're not alone, and it would be always lovely. These people are very keen to work with anyone who is interested. Otherwise, to connect with the university, because obviously the series is coming to an end. There are other ways to connect with us. There are some free MOOCs available for everyone who's already online. Connect with us online a bit further. There are masterclasses regularly organized. Some of them are hybrid. But there is also some enterprise support. So again, there's a lot of ways to connect with the university within the city, not just today. Here are some extra resources I came across. So the reason why I organized the series is because I don't know anything about tech. I'm clueless. So I wanted to have reliable sources because there was so much information online available in the room. So these are sources which I've been given by some of the panelists, but also by previous speakers who are really, really reliable and a good starting point for anyone who is interested, besides our recordings, which are available on YouTube. So that leads me to thank everyone. I have quite a long list at this point. My first thank goes to the person who actually, without this person, this wouldn't have happened, as Johan, who couldn't make it today. He gave me all the contacts with whom this would have not happened, so I don't know anyone in AI, but Johan does. Then obviously our panel, you have been absolutely amazing. Thank you for all rushing here today. I know everyone had to kind of travel some form of distance, so thank you. Adam and Teresa and admin support have been absolutely invaluable because emails came from left, right, and center. And then obviously these events were funded partly by the school, but also by Eagle Labs. But yeah, I have to say thank you to the people who gave me the money. So thank you. And our amazing AV support, Dan, who is hiding right next to me, he had to deal with me not using the microphone, so thank you. And however pretty the building is, and it is really stunning, AV in here is very hard to sort out, so he spent all morning doing that. And then the last big thank you, well, one of the last one, goes to you guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making it such an exciting event series. It wouldn't have been possible with all of you in the room. It's absolutely mind-blowing how diverse the audience is. Normally when I teach, I have like a certain type of audience. This is quite exciting. So, if anyone wants to stay in touch or has any other questions or complaints, I will forward the complaints, please email me. It'd be absolutely lovely to stay in touch and hear from you guys. And here's the final QR code, and that leaves me with, please join us for a drink. Eagle Labs was kind enough to keep us lubricated, so there will be one drink each, so please help yourself. And other than that, talk to each other, let the conversation go in, and let's have a lovely evening. Everyone online, if you're going to sleep, sleep well. If it's the beginning of the day, enjoy your day, and other than that, go your ways. Thank you all.